Glory to Jesus Christ, and welcome to this week's episode of God with Us Live. Every week, we're joined by men and women, monastics, clergy, and laity, exploring exciting and inspiring ways to live our Eastern Catholic faith today. Your host is Father Deacon Nick Medelsky, a husband, father, and deacon of the Ukrainian Catholic Eparchy of St. Nicholas. And now, here's Father Deacon Nick.
Well, hello once again, God with Us Live listeners. Father Deacon Nick, happy as always to be here with you to learn about more exciting things going on in our Eastern Catholic churches. You know, a lot of us carry around our cell phones and have a lot of apps on there. Some of those can be kind of a waste, suck our time, and we can waste a lot of time on those apps, or we can also find some wonderfully inspirational apps and other resources on our phones that can help us with our prayer life and help us with our spiritual journey and our quest for theosis, in fact, even. And my guest today was involved with the creation of one of those apps and involved with a lot of other great things, too, going on in the Eparchy of Edmonton. And really, it is a help to all of us in the Eastern Catholic churches. So welcome today. My guest is Ben Windsor. So welcome to the show, Ben.
Thanks very much for inviting me too, Nick. Really appreciate it.
And if you wouldn't mind, I could read your biography off, but I'm sure it's better to hear it from the horse's mouth. So would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I guess I'm Ben Windsor. I currently lead communications for the Eparchy of Edmonton here in Alberta. I do live in Red Deer, but I'm also, my day job I'm a marketing manager in commercial real estate, so I cover a portfolio of shopping centers. I also volunteer the Knights of Columbus. We just did a pop-up Eastern Catholic store in our local parish here, and now we're running a Candles for a Charity campaign this weekend. So I'd say kind of my background, I do have a Bachelor of Commerce degree in business, so it's a major in marketing, and I'm certified for ethical market research involving humans in Canada, so a lot of my background is pretty heavy in the marketing world.
Very interesting. And for those of our listeners wondering, because I had to look it up on a map, Red Deer is about halfway between Calgary and Edmonton. Is that about right?
Yeah, it's the halfway point between the two cities. Small town.
Yeah. Well, I always like getting the geography straight in my head of where people are at. So even though it's a radio show, and you probably look it up easier on a map, I still like to mention it. So Ben, what got you interested in communications in the first place? Obviously, you do it in the commercial world as well as for the church. But what kind of got you started in communications, and what got you involved with church communications?
Well, it's kind of funny because I accidentally entered church communications. It's kind of funny how it always works out. But during my schooling, I used to work, before I went to school, I worked trades, and then during school I worked trades. But towards the end of my degree, I started doing business-to-business industrial sales. So the COVID-19 pandemic had hit, and that pretty much annihilated the sales industry. And I had to be a little realistic. Okay, a huge chunk of my job comes from commission right now, and all three of my major accounts are gone. I'm going to have to start looking for different things. And at that time, I was a volunteer. I helped with the St. Joseph's Cathedral, the communications there. So I helped with things like social media, the live streams, websites. I wanted online donations, quite a few things there. And the father there said, hey, the Eparchy of Edmonton, they're looking for someone in communications. I said, you know what, I'm going to apply for it. I'm not doing too well with my current job, so I entered communications for the Eparchy of Edmonton with the intention of doing it for 3 or 4 months. Lo and behold, I'm still helping them out with communication. So it was purely a result of that, but I am, of course, a Ukrainian Catholic. I entered that sphere just purely out of coincidence, but since then I've been doing it, and I volunteer for it on the side as well. So,
and what kind of were you expecting going in? If you hadn't really, worked communications, especially for an eparchy, going from kind of a business background into that, what what kind of did you expect, and what kind of was maybe different than you expected?
Well, I knew there's quite a lot to do coming from because I'm still very private sector oriented, very business orientated. And when you look at things in terms of saying, okay, how do you reach out to people? How are you sharing your message? How are you visually presenting yourself? How do you reach non-Ukrainian Catholics? And when you realize very little eparchies and religious organizations really understand how do you reach people, how do you talk to people outside the pews, there's a lot to work on with that. And I think at the beginning I looked at it saying like, wow, I am something I have to start from scratch. I have no website really to work off of, no real social media, no imaging, no anything. Well, I'm gonna give it a little bit, see what I can achieve in a few years. Very daunting at the beginning.
Yeah, I can imagine that, and I can speak from experience working in communications, both at the parish level and on kind of nonprofit level. That oftentimes that's the case, right? You walk in and there's not much of a website to speak of, and there's not really something you mentioned that's important is a lot of the focus is more on how do we tell people who already go to our parishes what's going on in the parishes, and that's about it, right? The focus isn't
Mhm.
as much on evangelization. Would
Mhm.
would you speak about that a little bit more? Kind of the importance of communications, especially done well,
Yeah.
to an eparchy, and why it's something that we should bother to invest time in.
Yeah, and I think evangelization, that really is my bread and butter. That's something I love doing. Of course, reaching people on the pews, of course that's important. By the end of the day, most Catholic parishes, we already have those systems in place. We already have people dedicated to that, and bulletins and priests and committees. And often that's very decently done at times. But when you ask, okay, how are you reaching people outside the pews? The response often is, well, they have to come to our pews. And well, that's not how you reach people. And really, communications has nothing to do with communicating or marketing. It's about sharing the message of the gospel. And really, the job of people who understand communications and marketing is how can I reach the most amount of people? Because if we truly believe the mission of the church is to save souls and to share the good news, it would make sense that we would do everything in our power to share the message that Christ brings. And if we put up boundaries by saying, oh, I can't evangelize because I don't know how to do a website. I can't try something new because I don't know social media, or I don't want to do, door to door, or I don't want to talk to people. I can't do that. Well, that's not really leading the message of Christ. We need to really put our message out there. And in order to do that, you have to think outside the box. You have to try different things, do different things, learn new skills, always training. Even as someone, I've been in the marketing industry now for a couple of years, every single month, I have to learn a new skill set. I have to learn something new in order to keep up with trends. And if you have a constant state of learning, it's going to be a more and more effective plan. But it's more of moving away from viewing communications as a department and, oh, they put out messages and they make website posts. Well, sure, that's perhaps what anyone can do, but the purpose of communications is to share the good news of the gospel. And you need to reach as many people. If you have a website, you do it right, you should be reaching a minimum of 500 new people every single day. And if you reach 500 new people every single day, think about that, compound that 365 days a year. What impact will you have on the world and our culture if you're reaching that many people?
Yeah, absolutely. Well put. And I think sometimes people fail to grasp, like you said, that when you can put it in numbers like that, 500 new people, just from doing a website well, right? And
Mm,
making sure everything's up to date there. That's a huge number of people, and that's not nothing, right?
no.
There are plenty of people Googling and everything else, looking for answers, right? Sometimes it's answers
Yeah.
for silly things, but a lot of times people are looking for spiritual answers and more information. I know we've had two people email our parish out of the blue just within the past month, just asking for more information on Eastern Catholicism because they, stumbled across our webpage and we're the closest parish to them. So it's definitely out there. I know I'm probably putting you a little bit on the on the spot by
Yeah.
asking this question, but is there any sort of practical advice you could give to parishes who are looking at their messaging, looking at their communications? Like you said, you kind of came in and there was, a lot that needed to be worked on. And I can see a lot of other people looking at their what their parish has and saying, yeah, a lot of work needs to be done, but not really knowing where to start. Is there any sort of advice, any kind of guidance, kind of quick tips you could give someone who's maybe father says, "Hey, I want you to take care of communications for the parish." They say, "Yeah, I'll do that," and then walk in and go, "I have no idea where to start."
Oh boy, I got tons of ideas. So, I mean, if I was a new comms person, I was given the role of that. And if I was really interested, I think the first place I would start with is the theoretical. So I'm going to say I have no experience in marketing. I've never touched it. I've never touched comms. I never took a class. I have no idea. What would I do? So first off, if you like books, I would start with that first. Some books I highly recommend, Start With Why, Simon Sinek. It's by him. That's he writes about basically when you're creating these messages, you need to start with why. Why are you actually saying this? Why do you exist? Why are you doing the tasks that you're doing? And I think a lot of comms people, they get so stuck on, I need to make a blog post. I need to share this message. I need to do this. But why are you actually doing that? What is the underlying goal that you're trying to achieve? And aligning that to the mission and vision of your actual parish. I think, too, another big one, another huge inspirational book I read was Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. He basically explained how we always have that cheesy marketing from the early 90s, the throwing the product in your face and the numbers and this and that. But really, as a parish and as a church, we have a mission and we have a vision of society and we have something we're striving towards. So we should not be, doing those cheesy marketing tactics. We should really be building a story about our parish. We should be telling the story of who we are as a community, who we are as a local organization, what we have to offer, and what message we have to tell. And I think starting, building the story of your parish is huge. And then another one is The Copywriter's Handbook by Robert Bly. That's another big one. Understanding how to write in communications is astronomical. How to write persuasively, how to write to grab people's attention. Because I see this all the time where a lot of church documents, they're using Old English and Shakespearean English, which is fine and dandy, but the majority of people don't speak Shakespearean English anymore. We have a very modernized language, and the average, readership rate, I believe in Canada, is at grade 7 level. And if we're writing at a grade 12 level and very complicated text, people aren't going to read it. They're going to get bored quickly. The message is not going to be received. And the actual why are you trying to communicate with people? Well, no one's going to listen if they don't understand what you're saying. So understanding how to write is huge in marketing. Another one that, even though it's specific to websites, I still highly recommend it for general design because it relates. It's just called Hello Web Design by Tracy Osborne. That book it gives you a really good overview for someone who has no idea how you do graphic design. How do I use pictures? How do I use colors? What is font? How do they relate? I'm used to Microsoft Paint and Word for designing things. It gives you a really quick, easy summary on how to design simple, minimalist pictures and things for your parish that capture the attention and that people remember. Because people remember images. The most important thing on your message, more times than not, is not the text, it's the image. And most parishes forget that. So 75% of people say poor design of an organization, whether that's your website, your print, that impacts the organization's credibility. If I go on your website and I say, wow, this looks like you're from the 1990s, it probably means you're still thinking in the 1990s. 94% of at least Canadian consumers, their first impressions of an organization is based on their visuals and design. So if you have bad visuals and design and 94% of a first impression is from what they see, that's not good. Especially when our parishes, I mean, our faith is beautiful. We offer so much beauty in our parishes with our icons. And I mean, even a small parish alone with a couple icons is often more beautiful than a lot of other organizations and buildings today. So really understanding how beauty plays an important role in messaging, even if it's simple design, is huge. I know if you don't like business books and you want something a bit more Catholic focused, there's a famous book, Why They Follow, Lessons in Church Communications from that One Lost Sheep, Matthew Warner. He also does a really good job in explaining communications for churches themselves. But other than that, the majority of my skill set, I didn't learn it in 4 years of school. I didn't learn it on the job. I learned it by going on to YouTube and typing how to add a website banner, how to design a modern website, how to make an app. My entire career is based on knowing how to use Google search. So if you're trying to be a good comms person for your parish, learn how to be good at Googling, learn how to be good at YouTube. I would use books for the theoretical, so kind of understanding the theory of design, the theory of writing, the theory of mission and vision and, why you're doing things. And then I would use YouTube and Google for the practical. How do I practically design a website? How do I, effectively make social media that people will share and like and read?
And that's good sound advice, because I think it can be intimidating where people feel like, well, I don't have 4 years in college in marketing and web design and things like that. But it's good to know that even for someone who does, right, that Google and YouTube are still a steady resource of information, right?
Absolutely.
Well, once again, we have Ben Windsor from the Eparchy of Edmonton on with us today, talking about communications, church communications, two specific efforts that Ben's been involved in that I'm excited to talk about after we come back from a quick break to hear about our Saint of the Week. So stay tuned here on God With Us Live.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Scenes with the Saints. Do you know which saint traded himself to save a widow's son from slavery? Saint Paulinus the Merciful was born into a Roman senatorial family in Bordeaux, France. As a young man, he pursued a political career, being appointed a consul and then governor of the Campania province of Italy. Although not yet a Christian, Paulinus was impressed with the number of pilgrims that came to the city of Nola in Campania to venerate the relics of St. Felix. Paulinus would later credit his conversion to the intercession of St. Felix. Finishing his term as governor, Paulinus returned to Bordeaux, where he met and married a Christian noblewoman from Spain, Teresia, and was baptized soon afterwards. Wanting to live a simple life away from the wealth and comfort of his ancestral estate, Paulinus and Teresia moved to Barcelona. However, the holiness of the couple quickly brought them to the attention of Lampius, the Bishop of Barcelona, and Paulinus was reluctantly ordained a priest. After a few years, Paulinus felt called to return to Nola, and he and his wife took up residence near the shrine of St. Felix. They spent a great deal of time and money restoring and improving the shrine of St. Felix, and St. Paulinus even wrote a special hymn every year in honor of the beloved saint. After his wife passed away, Paulinus was ordained the Bishop of Nola and served his people tirelessly. Once, the son-in-law of the king of the Vandals raided Nola and took many citizens back to northern Africa as captives, demanding hefty ransoms. Paulinus was able to ransom most of them, but some were still left. A widow whose only son had been captured came to Paulinus and asked for his help. Paulinus had spent all of his treasury on ransoming the other captives, but he had a plan. Disguising himself, Paulinus went to Africa and offered to take the place of the widow's son. The Vandals gladly accepted and put Paulinus to work as a gardener. It wasn't until some time later that the king of the Vandals discovered, much to his amazement, that his son-in-law's gardener was the famous Bishop of Nola. Inspired by the humble bishop's example, the king quickly set Paulinus and the other captives from Nola free. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Scenes with the Saints. Join us again next time when we learn more about the lives of these holy men and women.
Well, hello again, and welcome back, God with Us Live listeners. Father Deacon Nick, excited as always to be here with you today. Speaking with Ben Windsor today from the Eparchy of Edmonton, who works comms up there, and talking kind of in general about different parts of working communications for the church at the Eparchy level, and just even at the parish level, right? Some practical tips, some advice on how to work on that. So part of the reason I had you on, Ben, of course, is your work at the Eparchy of Edmonton. It's one of the better eparchial websites to go on. There's a lot of resources there. There's clear branding and everything like that. So I appreciate that. But one of the things recently that really, again, I said, oh man, I got to get you on, is the iPraises app, which is something that I know took a while to pull together, but really, really a cool resource. So could you kind of talk about the reasoning behind putting an app together, and what kind of all was involved in bringing that from just an idea to something that people can actually download on their phones now?
Yeah, so before I made iPraises, I've never actually made an app before. So first off, a ton of Googling, a couple days of Googling how to make an app and how to develop it. So that, first off, I by no means am a developer, and I think at the beginning, the initial beta launches, we could really tell from that. But I'd say the first thing to do, and this is relevant for everything in the communication sphere, is you need to have an understanding of your audience. The example I love making is market research from 1890s. So if we did market research in 1890s, seeking ways to enhance transportation, and we talked to a bunch of people around us, we said, okay, how can we make transportation better for you? Everyone would say we want stronger, faster horses with a extended lifespan. So that would make sense. Okay, let's, start focusing on breeding the best superior horses. But the problem with, asking your audience is sometimes they frankly don't necessarily know what they want, as odd as that sounds, because if you wanted to really revolutionize transportation, you would understand people want improved transportations, but there are multiple ways that you can solve that problem, such as inventing a gas-powered automobile. And that's exactly what people, Ford did, in essence, right? He said, well, people, they don't want a better, faster, stronger horse. They want a horse that can last them a lot longer, even though the first cars sucked. But and I think you have to understand your audience. And when initially I put out a survey trying to understand, okay, what are the needs of people? What do they actually want? And I use that to discover themes. And then I looked around at, all right, well, what are other successful apps? And I had a ton of back and forth using metrics. I looked at what are things people are using? What do they care about most? What is the most effective thing? And if you downloaded iPraises at first, we had three things. We had the prayer journal, we had audio prayers, and we had the liturgical year calendar. But over time, I continuously sought feedback from our audience and said, okay, what is most effective for you? and people really enjoyed the liturgical year calendar. So we really focused it on one thing, and instead of doing a lot of things kind of okay, we instead made something, one thing, and we tried to do one thing really well. And the inspiration, of course, it came from Ukraine. There's an app called Divin Suite. It's the Ukrainian version, so we kind of wanted to do a little bit of a twist on that app, just being an English language one. This one specifically, it does try to reach out to everyday or practicing Ukrainian Catholics that often are quite involved in their church that would be reading a liturgical year calendar, but and another one, too, is a lot of small parishes. They don't have the ability to afford pew books. They don't have the ability to afford a lot of print materials. So this was kind of a free solution for, well, the majority of the new demographic have cell phones. This is a free way without needing to invest a lot of money into traditional print and offer it digitally.
And for those who haven't had the opportunity to download the app, can you kind of talk about the app itself? I guess we've been talking about the development and everything, but what's all the features and things like that.
Yeah, so it basically is just the liturgical year calendar. So it'll say different things like the feast day, everything you kind of need to know about the Ukrainian Catholic liturgical year calendar. We have a new update coming up that's going to add a couple more things. Vespers, I believe, is the next update. So we got a lot more coming. Basically, it's a tool you can use to help your prayer life. It changes every single day. So you open the app, you click a calendar day, whatever the day is. You could use it for your parish. You could use it for praying that day. And you can also just learn it. Hey, you know what? I just want to read the gospel of the day. Let's just, a little 5-second little faith on my day. Let's start my day off with the gospel. You can open iPraises, open today's date, and read a little bit more about the gospel.
And it's nice to have it in a nice, handy little resource. And like you said, instead of trying to do 50 different things, right, it's an app that tries to focus on one thing and do that well. Which I think is important because it's, sometimes you can download these apps and they have so many features and other tabs to click on that you can get lost, right?
Yep. Especially prayer.
Right, yeah, especially prayer ones, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's one fantastic resource that I wanted to be able to share with our listeners, that iPraises app. I use it all the time for the, especially like you said, to read the gospel. I always use that to, read the gospel in the epistle of the day. That's always handy, or the Troparion and the Kontakion as well. So it's a nice resource to have for that. And if people haven't used it yet, of course, depending on your jurisdiction, it might be slightly different translations or whatever, but still, it's a nice handy resource to just have that, right? So another thing that you were involved in that I wanted to have you on to talk about is this magazine that was published by your Knights of Columbus Council there in Red Deer. I had the name written down here, the Men of Worship magazine. There we go.
Yeah.
And it just kind of a very, again, a beautiful magazine put together well. Could you tell us a little bit about how the idea for that came about? Why was that something that you came up with? Was that something the council kind of collectively came up with, and what it took to take that idea to print?
Yeah. It's kind of funny because some people are always surprised how, they think this is a giant expenditure and it was a huge deal and it took us a long time. I put together the magazine. I got off work early one day at Friday, and I made it from 1 o'clock until 8 o'clock one night. And then I presented it to my local Knights Council saying, hey, I made a magazine because I was bored. I wish I was joking. And I said, I could make it in Ukrainian, but I need some help with translation. They said, hey, this is amazing. We should definitely do this. I put the magazine into AI, and then I translated into Ukrainian in 5 minutes, and then I had a parishioner look it over on a Sunday afternoon. A couple people submitted pieces to it. I think that was the longest process, but it was a very quick process in itself. And since I work in the industry, I already have contacts with printing presses who hoped get me at least a bit of a discount. And it was a bit of a cheap run at first. I wanted to get the most bang out of the buck for this. So I went around to parishes saying, hey, I will make your parish a custom magazine if you pay for the printing costs. So basically, we had magazines sent to Calgary, to Edmonton, to Grand Prairie, a couple places in the Grand Prairie area, but every single magazine was customized to each area. So there are some pages like top things to do with, as a father to do with your kids. And in Red Deer, of course, the version of that, it gives you 6 activities to do with your kids in Red Deer. But in Edmonton, it changes it to Edmonton, Calgary to Calgary, Grand Prairie to Grand Prairie, and it changes based on what town or city you're in. So we had that element of customization. We also customized the photos to each parish. So every parish, if it was going to one in Grand Prairie, the photos that I used featured their parish community. So it featured their priests, their people, their nights, if I could get a photo, being active in the community to showcase them as a community as a whole. And then basically it was crowdfunded. So I paid for the copies myself in Red Deer, and then different people, parishioners would sponsor it for their parish. So in Grand Prairie, a parishioner, they said, hey, I'll spend, they're quite generous, quite nice. They said, hey, I'll spend $300 to buy as many copies as I can. And I basically went to the printing press. They printed off 300 and mailed it off to Grand Prairie. And that's kind of the practicality of the process, I guess you could say. It was a bit simple to do, but I think it's more the theoretical way of, that's kind of the bigger thing. And I think that's a lesson a lot of people in the Ukrainian Catholic Church can take, whether you're in communications or not, because it goes to my point of communications is not just a matter of making a website post or making a social media post. It really is strategic. So with this magazine, the first thing we did is we had a vision and a mission, which for the Knights of Columbus, our mission is to empower Catholic men to live faith at home, in their parish, at work, and in their community. And when I have something like the Knights of Columbus to work with, who has a really strong mission statement, for me, it's so easy. When you have a good, strong mission statement and you have a good, a decent logo, everything else is the easiest thing on the planet. Because suddenly I have a mission, I have all my content, and I have all the colors and fonts to use. So as an example, the mission, empower men to live their faith at home, in parish, at work, and in the community, all of the content then targets that mission statement. So an example is, an article in the magazine, Business Leadership Lessons from Our Faith, hits the goal of living our faith at work. Catholic Call to Service hits the goal of living our faith in the community. Tips for creating a prayer routine hits the goal of living our faith at home. So we really use, understand your mission statement and how you use that mission statement in your parish, whether you're in youth ministry, in catechesis, even if you're the parish priest. It's super important. We also looked at age levels. So the Knights of Columbus, it says we empower Catholic men. We don't say young men and we don't say old men. We just say men. So we had to keep in mind, okay, what different age demographics have different, considerations. So some articles like praying for grandchildren, that reaches grandfathers. Tips for parents to get kids ready on time, that reaches new young fathers. So you have to really consider the content. And also consider what content don't you need. And I think this is often something we don't think about when we're in the church. What don't we need at this parish event? What don't we need in the bulletin? What don't we need on our parish poster board? Because that's also a big thing to consider. For example, in a magazine whose main objective is to empower men, do you need a message from your local politician? I'm sorry, member of parliament, but does that achieve the mission? Is a message of gratitude from a local leader needed? Is an article shouting out the publishing team? Is that needed? So you have to think, what content also do I need, but also what content don't I need? What won't help the mission of the actual thing we're trying to do? Also consider photos. Photos are astronomical. Like, they are the toughest part of any good communications, because photos, you have to be there. You have to grab the photo. You have to get it copyright free. It has to be relevant. It has to feature people. Like, there's a lot of considerations on photos. And that's another thing we as Ukrainian Catholic parishes, sometimes we think, oh, just, slap the regular photos we have, call it a day. But the photos in the magazine, writing the content for the magazine, that took me maybe 2 hours, the easiest part. Photos were the hardest. So the photos we used, again, it targets the mission statement. As an example, the images we used, it showcases Knights in our local community. It shows the local Red Deerian Knights. It shows local people in Grand Prairie. It shows, Calgarians. It shows Edmontonians, wherever you're located. It's actually showcasing how vibrant our community is. It shows photos of men leading in our parishes. It has images of men together in marriages. The front cover, it depicts a priest leading a crowd in a parish. So really understand, what photos do you have? If we didn't really care and we just used whatever photos we had at our disposal, a lot of photos that you have are focused on clergy. And I think the problem sometimes that we have, often our front covers, our magazines, our websites, they often only feature clergy, which creates an impression that our church is comprised only of clergy members. And while we're not trying to reach the clergy, right? That's not who we're trying to tell the message to. Of course, clergy are important. We want them to read it. But the intention behind Men of Worship is to motivate men and to inspire men to really be the change in their local communities. So we wanted to highlight the contributions of everyday, ordinary men who are making tangible, positive impacts. And when you do that, it allows the reader to connect, being like, hey, I know that guy. I see that guy. He's volunteering. Why can't I? Or, hey, that guy who just started, doing this one initiative, I can do that. But if the photos you're using are showcasing, well, in order for you to make a change, you need a caller, or you need to somehow be, someone in the church. And it's like, no, we need to empower our parishioners too, our laity. Those are the people who really make an impact on our local community. So photos, definitely, they're the hardest thing in communications, way harder than an article is. Difficulty of the content also is important. Consider the knowledge level of your audience. A lot of times, people who are writing content for Ukrainian Catholics, they often have PhDs, and they're very well versed. And then you have, your average everyday man. Do they have a PhD, or are they really going to understand it? And really, all the content we make, consider you're always talking to someone new. Because if you reach someone who's new, you can reach everyone. And I think that's super important. So understanding that the articles in Men of Worship, they take secular issues and they provide a faith lesson to them. So when you take secular issues everyday people face and you provide a faith lesson, suddenly it doesn't matter how difficult the concept is, everyone can understand it because everyone faces everyday issues. As an example, maybe, let's say I wrote an article on a complicated theological concept, maybe the Trinity, a historical council. The problem is people often need to understand, okay, well, I've heard of the council or I've heard of the Trinity, but they need a little bit of background information. If you go up to a random person on the street and you say, hey, do you know and want to learn more about the Trinity and its symbolism? A lot of people probably wouldn't, be receptive to that message. But if you say, hey, maybe have you ever considered how to find stillness in your life? Right? Well, that's something everyone can relate to. an example is something that relates to everyone, no matter who you are in your faith journey or where you're at. An article like Why Am I Ukrainian Catholic? Well, that's inspiring to both new members and old members, because a new member might say, hey, I'm going through these struggles too. That's, maybe this is a church for me. And an old member might say, hey, I remember when I first joined the church, or hey, I believe the same things. This is why I'm Ukrainian Catholic too. Or another article, Building Strong Marriages. I mean, all married couples can relate to that, no matter what their faith is. So you don't need to consider the difficulty level if topics are understood by everyone and anyone. And of course, I'm not saying don't stop writing about, as saints or history or Trinity, not at all. But I'm saying, when you're understanding your audience and who you're trying to reach, for me, I'm trying to reach everyday Ukrainian Catholic men who may not have taken any classes or studied or watched videos or anything. Right? They may not relate to something about in-depth history lessons or, a lesson from someone who lived 500 years ago, but they sure can learn a lesson or two from, their neighbor who had this really unique idea, or their friend who's volunteering in their community. That's someone they can really relate to. Also, the language you use. Really consider the language and how you're relating to the reader. So it's a common place in how I write. I often address the reader and I try to find similarities between me and the reader. So a common thing I do in my writing is I say our faith. So never put Ukrainian Catholic faith as, a big theoretical concept that you have. Well, it's not a theoretical concept. It's our faith. It's our community. It's our parish. And it's understanding that, me and the reader, we share something in common. We both have faith. Even if you're not Ukrainian Catholic, you're reading a Christian magazine, so you probably have faith of some sort. You perhaps may have not just entered Ukrainian Catholic Church yet, so this might be your first step on coming into our community. But understand what similarities do you have with the reader and try and get that bond between you and them. So our Grand Knight, as an example, he wrote an article talking about the direct struggles that every man faces in the modern era. Like he talks about dopamine triggers like social media and pornography, weed and drinking and all these things that, yes, that's, a real thing in our society. And he says this is something everyday men have to face. And that's, a universal experience for a lot of men. It's a hard topic to talk about, but if you actually address it, a lot of men would be like, hey, you know what? Maybe I've struggled with drinking. I've struggled with porn. I've struggled with being on my phone all day. I think these are, being on my phone all day. That's a universal struggle for a lot of us today. So when you really think, what do we share in common? And let's talk about it. Sometimes it has to be controversial, but it's important to bring stuff like that up.
Yeah, absolutely. There's what kind of feedback have you gotten before I give my feedback? What kind of feedback have you gotten from people in the parishes about the magazine?
I'd say a lot of people were very surprised at it first. They thought, this was something that was in the works for months, and it was like, oh, wow, it's a very professional presentation. A lot of people were asking, like, oh, you're not charged. They were surprised it was free. That was a huge goal of mine, was I wanted all these magazines to be free because I don't want you paying for it. I want you, because a person who might pay for a magazine, they're already willing to spend their hard-earned money on a
Right.
Ukrainian Catholic book. Well, I don't really want to reach that person. I want to reach the person who's, on the edge, who's like, I don't know about my faith. I'm kind of lost. I'm lost in my life. I'm not Ukrainian Catholic. I don't even know what the word Catholic means. I want to reach those people, and they're not going to be spending money on a Catholic book. But if you say, hey, take this book, it's got a lot of life issues. It might help you out. It tells a little bit about our parish, our faith. It shows our local community, kind of who we are. And a lot of people, they commented on how it was free, how it was, it showed local people. The content is modern. It looks professional. Minimalist design, that definitely came up a lot.
Well, that's great to hear. I really, looking at it, it's just, again, beautifully presented. It's nice to see pictures of real people, like you said, around the parish, real events at the parish. Even though I'm not, in the parish in Red Deer and everything, you could tell that these are real pictures, not ones that someone's pulled out of a stock album, right? Or
Mhm.
anything like that. So I really appreciated that in the design and everything. And even though I know it's because of the cost and everything else and the time involved, it's obviously most relevant to your parishes there. But I think
Yeah.
there's still great content there that people, here in Minnesota or wherever else can glean something from. For people who want to check it out, and I guess I should ask this first: is this a one-time thing? Is this planned to be monthly? Is there any kind of planned,
Yeah,
frequency?
this was a one-time thing, so it really was. I wanted to make a head turner initiative. Usually for local nights, I try to come up with a new idea, something different every month. So this was kind of one of my monthly ideas, just because, practically speaking, the cost to print one of these initially, I think I paid $2.25 per copy.
Hmm.
But if I was to continue doing that, the cost would go up to $4. And when
Uh,
you're trying to get a lot out, budget wise, it's not the best. But
right.
no, it's meant to be a one time thing, just to be a head turner and to impact as many men as possible in Alberta. We tried to distribute it to as many parishes as possible, and then we made it online for free. Which, if you just go on Google, search Men of Worship Edmonton Eparchy, it should come up. If not, just go on the Edmonton Eparchy's website, the resource library page. You can view it there, or if you just search on the website Men of Worship, it'll come up.
Well, fantastic. Once again, Ben, thanks so much for making the time to be with us today. There's a lot of great information and hopefully a lot of great ideas for people who are listening about how to engage people, and especially, like you said, how to reach out to people who aren't already in the pews, right? And help to evangelize people and also excite people who are in the pews, right? Sometimes we can kind of get into our place of complacency and get kind of stuck in a groove, and it's exciting to see things like this, these initiatives, and to help reinvigorate our faith and our enthusiasm. So thank you so much for the work you're doing, and thank you so much for joining us today.
And thanks very much for having me on the show, Nick. Really appreciate it.
And thank you for listening to God with Us Live. Always love to have you here on God with Us Live. This opportunity to learn about exciting things going on in our Eastern Catholic churches. And if once again, as I mentioned last week, if you'd like to support the great work we do here at God with Us, just visit our website at godwithusonline.org, and there is the Faith Bucks program, which is a great way to kind of find your niche, different levels of giving, different ways to support the work we do here at God with Us. Both the webinars, this podcast, a lot of the different resources we're able to put out there. So once again, godwithusonline.org, and the Faith Bucks thing is right there on the front page. So once again, thank you for joining us today, for tuning in, for subscribing, all those sorts of things, and can't wait to bring you another exciting conversation next week here on God with Us Live. God bless.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of God with Us Live. Make sure to tell a friend or two about us and subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to follow God with Us online on Facebook and Instagram for even more great content about the Eastern Catholic Churches. And don't forget to check out all the other great Eastern Catholic podcasts at godwithusradio.org, where faith meets life. God with Us Live is a production of God with Us Radio, hosted, produced, and edited by Nick Modelski. Send us a message at info@godwithusradio.org.